married her off to a man who beat her half to death every Saturday night and twice on Sundays. Found her in the creek one morning, drowned herself rather than go back to him. Alara's throat tightened. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Just don't waste the chance you got. He swung up into his saddle. You coming or not? She looked back at the saloon. Through the window, she could see her father already drinking the money Cade had given him, probably trying to forget he'd just sold his daughter for the price of a good horse. She looked at the road leading out of town, disappearing into the darkness. Then she grabbed the saddle horn and pulled herself up onto Ash's back. It wasn't graceful. She had to try twice, and the mare shifted under her weight, but she made it. Good, Cade said. Stay close. Road's rough at night. They rode out of Covenant Creek without looking back. The first hour passed in silence. Alara kept expecting Cade to say something, to explain where they were going, what he expected of her, what the rules were. But he just rode ahead, his back straight, his eyes on the trail, and said nothing at all. The road climbed steadily up into the foothills, leaving behind the flat scrubland around the town. Pine trees started appearing, then getting thicker, until they were riding through forest that blocked out most of the moonlight. Alara's hands were cramping from gripping the reins too hard. Every shadow looked like something dangerous. Every snap of a twig made her jump. You doing all right back there? Cade called over his shoulder. Fine, she lied. You're breathing like a rabbit being chased by a fox. Relax. Nothing out here's going to hurt you that I can't handle. How do you know? Because I've been riding this trail for 15 years and I'm still breathing. That should have been reassuring, but somehow it wasn't. They reached the cabin just before dawn. Alara was half asleep in the saddle, swaying with Ash's movement, when Cade said, We're here. She lifted her head and blinked at the clearing ahead. The cabin was small, just one room, from the look of it, built from rough-cut logs that had weathered to gray. The roof was split shingles, and there was a stone chimney on one side. A lean-to stable stood off to the left, and beyond that she could see what looked like the beginnings of a garden plot, now overgrown. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd expected. Stable's on the left, Cade said, sliding off his horse. Get Ash settled, then come inside. There's stew left from yesterday if you're hungry. He disappeared into the cabin, leaving Alara sitting on the mare in the gray pre-dawn light. She dismounted, more of a controlled fall than anything graceful, and led Ash toward the stable. The mare followed easily, and when Alara pushed open the door, she found a clean space with 2 stalls, fresh straw, and a water trough. She'd expected something rougher, dirtier, but everything was neat, orderly, like Cade actually cared about the animals in his keeping. She unsaddled Ash, fumbling with the buckles because her father had never bothered teaching her properly, and rubbed the mare down with a rag she found hanging on a nail. Ash stood patient through all of it, occasionally turning her head to nose at Alara's hair. You're a good girl, Alara murmured. Better than most people I know. When she finally made it to the cabin, her legs were shaking from exhaustion. Cade had a fire going, and the smell of something savory filled the small space. He'd lit a lantern on the table, and in the warm light, Alara could see the cabin more clearly. One big room, like she'd thought. A bed in the corner, just a frame with a straw-tick mattress and a pile of furs. A table with 2 chairs. Shelves on the walls holding supplies. Sacks of flour and beans, jars of preserves, tools wrapped in oiled cloth. A rifle mounted above the door. A cooking pot hanging over the fire. It was sparse, but it was clean, organized, like the stable. Sit, Cade said, nodding toward one of the chairs. She sat. He ladled stew into a bowl, venison, from the smell of it, with carrots and potatoes, and set it in front of her along with a hunk of bread. Eat. She picked up the spoon, and her hands were shaking so bad she almost dropped it. Cade noticed. He sat down across from her, his own bowl in front of him, and said, You're safe here. Nobody's going to take that food from you. Take your time. She didn't take her time. She couldn't. The stew was the best thing she'd tasted in months, rich and thick, with real meat in it, not just gristle and fat. She ate until the bowl was empty, then used the bread to soak up every last drop. When she looked up, Cade was watching her with something that might have been sadness. When's the last time you had a full meal? He asked. I don't know. A while? Jesus. He shook his head. You can have more if you want it. I'm good. She set the bowl down, suddenly self-conscious. Thank you. Don't thank me for feeding you. That's basic decency. Not where I come from. Cade was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You ain't there anymore. She looked around the cabin again, trying to make sense of what her life had become in the span of a few hours. Yesterday morning, she'd woken up in her father's house knowing exactly what her day would be. Cooking, cleaning, trying to stay out of the way. Now she was sitting in a stranger's cabin in the middle of nowhere, and she had no idea what tomorrow would bring. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something she couldn't quite name. Not hope. That seemed too big, too fragile. But maybe the space where hope could grow, if she let it. Where do I sleep? She asked. Cade gestured toward the bed. There. I'll take the floor. That's your bed. And you're a guest. I'll make a pallet by the fire. It's warm enough. I can take the floor. Alara. He said her name firmly, like he was talking to a spooked horse. Take the damn bed. I ain't gonna argue about it. She was too tired to fight. She nodded and stood, her legs protesting every movement. The bed was harder than she expected. The straw tick didn't have much give, but the furs were soft and warm, and the moment she lay down, her body seemed to sink into the mattress like it had been waiting for this. Cade? She said, her eyes already closing. Yeah? Why'd you really do it? Buy me, I mean. You could have just let Blackwell have me. There was a long pause, then, told you already, had a sister. That's not the whole reason. Another pause. No, it ain't. But it's the only one I'm giving you tonight. Get some sleep, Alara. Tomorrow's going to be hard. She wanted to ask more, to push, to understand this man who'd upended her entire life on what seemed like a whim, but exhaustion dragged her down into darkness before she could form the words. Her last thought before sleep took her was that for the first time in as long as she could remember, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow would bring. Ditasem. She woke to the sound of an axe biting into wood. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling above her was wrong. Rough logs instead of cracked plaster. The air smelled like pine and smoke instead of unwashed bodies and stale beer. Then it all came rushing back. The saloon, her father, Cade, the choice. She sat up, and every muscle in her body screamed in protest. The ride had been longer than she thought, and her legs felt like they'd been beaten with a stick. Outside, the axe fell again. Steady, rhythmic. She pushed herself out of bed and went to the window. Cade was in the clearing, splitting logs. He'd taken off his shirt despite the morning chill, and she could see the muscles in his back and shoulders working as he swung the axe. He moved with the kind of efficiency that came from doing something 1,000 times. No wasted motion, no hesitation. He wasn't young. There was gray in his dark hair, and his body had the worn look of a man who'd lived hard. But he was strong. The kind of strong that came from necessity, not vanity. He set a new log on the stump and raised the axe. Alara found herself watching the way he moved, the way his body coiled and released with each swing. There was something almost meditative about it. Then he must have felt her watching, because he turned and looked right at the window. She jumped back, her face flushing hot. Stupid. He was going to think she was some kind of... You awake? He called. Got coffee on the fire if you want it. She took a breath, steadied herself, and opened the cabin door. I'm awake. Sleep all right? Better than I have in years. Good. He sank the axe into the stump and reached for his shirt. We got a lot to do today. You up for it? What kind of work? Firewood for one. Need enough to get through winter, and we're short. Also got to check the traps, haul water from the creek, patch some holes in the stable roof. He pulled his shirt on. You know how to do any of that? No. Then you're going to learn. She followed him into the cabin where the coffee was indeed waiting, strong and black, the way her mother used to make it. She wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into her fingers. I don't know what I'm doing, she admitted. Any of this. I don't know how to survive out here. That's why I'm teaching you. Cade poured himself a cup and leaned against the table. Look, I ain't expecting you to know everything right off, but I need you to be willing to try, to pay attention when I show you something, and to not quit the first time it gets hard. I won't quit. You say that now. Wait till your hands are bleeding from the axe handle and your back's so sore you can't stand up straight. I've worked hard before. Not like this, you haven't. He said it matter of fact, not cruel. Town work and mountain work are different. Out here, if you don't do something right, you don't just get yelled at. You freeze, or starve, or worse. So when I tell you to do something a certain way, I need you to listen. Can you do that? She met his eyes. Yes. All right then. He set down his cup. Finish your coffee and meet me outside. We'll start with the wood. Chopping wood was harder than it looked. Cade made it seem easy. One clean swing, the log split in two. But when Alara tried it, the axe either bounced off the wood or got stuck halfway through. You're using your arms, Cade said, watching her struggle. Use your whole body. Let the weight of the axe do the work. She tried again. The axe glanced off and nearly took out her shin. Shot. Jesus! Cade stepped in and took the axe from her. You're going to hurt yourself. Watch. He positioned a log, gripped the axe, and swung. The motion was smooth, a slight crouch, then an upward lift, then down with his whole body behind it. The log split cleanly. See? It's all in the rhythm. You don't fight it. You work with it. He handed the axe back to her. Try again. She did. This time the axe bit into the wood but didn't go all the way through. Better, Cade said. Again. By the 10th swing, her hands were blistering. By the 20th, blood was seeping through the broken skin. But she kept going because Cade was watching, and she'd be damned if she was going to prove him right about her quitting. That's enough, he finally said. Your hands are a mess. I can keep going. No, you can't. Come on. He led her back to the cabin and made her sit at the table while he rummaged through a box on one of the shelves. He came back with a tin of salve and strips of clean cloth. Give me your hands. She held them out, palms up. The blisters had burst, leaving raw, weeping patches of skin. Cade's jaw tightened. You should have stopped sooner. You said not to quit. I also said to pay attention. There's a difference between pushing through and being stupid. He opened the tin and scooped out some of the salve. This is going to sting. It did. She sucked in a breath through her teeth but didn't pull away. Cade worked quickly, spreading the salve over the blisters and wrapping her hands in the cloth strips. His hands were rough, calloused, but surprisingly gentle. There, he said when he was done. Keep those clean and they'll heal in a few days. In the meantime, no more axe work. Then what am I supposed to do? Plenty of other things that don't need hands. He stood and put the tin away. You can help me check the traps this afternoon, and tonight I'll start teaching you to read. She stared at him. Read? Yeah, you know how? No. Then we'll fix that. Can't get by in this world without reading. My pa never thought it was important. Your pa was wrong about a lot of things. Cade looked at her, and there was something fierce in his expression. You're going to learn, Alara. Reading, writing, numbers, all of it. Because knowledge is the only thing nobody can take from you once you've got it. She didn't know what to say to that. Nobody had ever cared whether she could read or write. It wasn't something girls like her needed, her father had said. It was a waste of time. But here was this man, this stranger who'd bought her freedom for $160, telling her she was worth the effort of teaching. Okay, she said quietly. I'll learn. Good. Now come on. Traps won't check themselves. They spent the afternoon walking the trap line Cade had set up in the woods around the cabin. He showed her how to approach each trap carefully, how to reset the ones that hadn't caught anything, how to dispatch the animals that had been caught without making them suffer. It was grim work, but necessary. The pelts would sell in town, and the meat would keep them fed through winter. Don't get attached, Cade warned as they skinned a rabbit. These ain't pets. They're food and money. You start thinking of them as anything else, you'll starve. I know that. Do you? You grew up in town. You ain't had to kill your own dinner before. No, but I've watched chickens get their heads cut off. I know death. Watching and doing are different. She looked at the rabbit in her hands, still warm, its fur soft. Then she looked at Cade. Teach me, she said. So he did. By the time they got back to the cabin, the sun was setting and Alara's hands were throbbing despite the bandages. But she'd learned how to skin a rabbit, how to set a snare, how to tell fresh tracks from old ones. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd known that morning. That night, after dinner, Cade pulled out a battered book and set it on the table between them. "Can you write your name?" he asked. "No." He took a piece of charcoal and a flat piece of birch bark. "Then that's where we'll start." He wrote the letters slowly, E-L-A-R-A. "That's you," he said. "That's your name." She stared at the marks on the bark, feeling something twist in her chest. She'd existed for 23 years, and this was the first time she'd ever seen her own name written down. "Copy it," Cade said, handing her the charcoal. Her bandaged hands made it awkward, but she managed. The letters came out crooked, shaky, barely legible. "Good," Cade said. "Now do it again." They worked until the fire burned low and Ilara's eyes were crossing from exhaustion. But by the time Cade sent her to bed, she could write her name 3 times in a row without messing up. It was a small thing, insignificant probably to anyone else, but to her, it felt like the first real thing she'd ever owned. The weeks that followed blurred together in a rhythm Ilara had never known existed. Wake before dawn, fire, coffee. Work until her body screamed, eat. Work some more. Lessons by lamplight. Sleep so deep it felt like falling into a well. Her hands healed, grew calluses, healed again. The blisters became tougher skin, and the axe that had felt impossibly heavy that first day became an extension of her arms. She learned to read the grain of the wood, to feel when a log was ready to split, to adjust her stance so the impact didn't jar her shoulders. Cade watched her like a hawk those first weeks, correcting her grip, her posture, the angle of her swing. He wasn't cruel about it, but he wasn't soft either. When she did something wrong, he told her. When she did it right, he just nodded and moved on to the next thing. She'd expected praise, maybe, some acknowledgement that she was doing well for someone who'd never held an axe before a month ago. But Cade didn't operate that way. The work was the work. You did it right, or you did it again. "You're getting better," he said one afternoon, watching her split a pile of pine logs. It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd gotten, and it made something warm bloom in her chest. "Thanks. Don't let it go to your head. Still got a long way to go before winter." The mention of winter had become a constant refrain. Winter was coming, and they needed to be ready. It wasn't just firewood, though that was a big part of it. They needed meat, smoked, dried, preserved in every way Cade could manage. They needed the cabin chinked tight against the cold, the roof patched, the stable reinforced. They needed supplies from town, which meant Cade would have to ride down and trade the pelts they'd been collecting. "I should go with you," Ilara said when he mentioned the trip. "No." "Why not?" "Because your father's down there. Your brother, Blackwell. You really want to walk back into that?" She hadn't thought about them in weeks. Out here they felt like something from another life, distant and unreal. But Cade was right. They were still down there, and running into them would be ugly. "What if they ask about me?" "Let them ask. I don't answer to them." Cade loaded another pelt into his pack. "Besides, I'll only be gone 2 days. You can handle things here." "Alone?" "You know how to keep the fire going, how to check the traps, how to shoot if something comes sniffing around." He'd taught her to handle the rifle a week ago, and she'd proven to be a decent shot, much to his surprise. "You'll be fine." She wanted to argue, but the look on his face told her it would be pointless. When Cade made up his mind about something, that was the end of it. He left the next morning, riding out before the sun cleared the mountains. Ilara stood in the doorway watching him go, and for the first time since arriving at the cabin, she felt the weight of true solitude. The first day wasn't so bad. She kept busy, chopping wood, checking the traps, hauling water, practicing her letters with charcoal on bark. Cade had left her a list of words to copy, and she worked through them methodically, sounding them out the way he'd taught her. But when night fell and the cabin was empty except for her, the silence became oppressive. Every creak of the logs settling, every rustle outside the door, sent her heart racing. She kept the rifle close, loaded and ready, and barely slept. The second day was worse. She'd gone to check the eastern trap line, the one that ran along the ridge above the cabin, and found one of the snares torn apart. Not sprung, torn. Something big had done it, and recently. Bear, probably. Or a mountain lion. She reset the snare with shaking hands, her eyes scanning the trees, and hurried back to the cabin. She spent the rest of the day inside, jumping at shadows, the rifle across her lap. When Cade rode back that evening, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies, she nearly cried with relief. "Everything all right?" he asked, swinging down from his horse. "Fine." "Good." "One of the traps got torn up, but I fixed it." He frowned. "Which one?" "Eastern line. The one by the big cedar." "Show me." They went together in the fading light, and Cade crouched beside the snare she'd reset, studying the ground. His expression darkened. "Mountain lion," he said. "Big one, from the tracks. Been a while since we had one come this close." "Is that bad?" "Could be. They usually avoid people, but if it's hungry or protecting territory." He stood. "We'll need to be careful for a while. No wandering off alone. Keep the rifle with you when you're outside." That night, as they ate dinner, Cade told her about the trip to town. "Your father asked about you," he said, not looking up from his plate. Alara's stomach tightened. "What did you tell him?" "That you were fine and it wasn't his business." "How'd he take that?" "About how you'd expect. Got loud, made some threats. Blackwell had to calm him down." Did he seem like he missed me?" Cade finally looked at her, and there was something sad in his eyes. "No, Alara. He seemed like a man who was angry his property got away." The words stung, even though she'd known the truth of them. Her father didn't love her. Maybe he never had. She was just one more thing he'd failed at, one more disappointment in a long line of them. "I'm sorry," Cade said quietly. "I know that's hard to hear." "It's the truth. I'd rather have the truth than pretty lies." "Good, because I'm not much for lying." They ate in silence for a while. Then Alara said, "Thank you for not telling him where I am, for keeping me safe." "You're keeping yourself safe. I'm just teaching you how." But that wasn't quite true, and they both knew it. Cade had given her more than lessons. He'd given her a chance to become something other than what her father had made her. Over the following weeks, as autumn deepened into the kind of cold that bit through layers, Alara felt herself changing. Not just physically, though her body was stronger now, lean with muscle from constant work, but in ways harder to define. She stood taller, spoke more, started to trust her own judgment about things. Cade noticed. She could tell by the way he started asking her opinion instead of just giving orders. "What do you think about this? How would you handle that?" Small things, but they meant something. One afternoon, while they were reinforcing the stable, he said, "You ever think about what you want to do? After winter, I mean." She looked up from the board she was holding. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you came here because it was better than the alternative. But you got a choice now. You could stay. You could go somewhere else. You could do anything you want." He hammered in a nail. "Just wondering if you'd thought about it." She hadn't, not really. The future had always been something that happened to her, not something she got to decide. But now, "I don't know," she admitted. "I like it here. The work's hard, but it's honest, and I'm learning things, important things." "That's not the same as wanting to stay." "No, but it's a start." He smiled at that, a rare full smile that made him look younger. "Yeah, it is." They worked in comfortable silence after that, but the question stayed with Alara. What did she want? For the first time in her life, the answer actually mattered. That night, during their reading lesson, something shifted. They were working through a battered copy of a frontier almanac Cade had brought back from town, and Alara was sounding out words about crop rotation when she stumbled over a particularly long one. "Fertilization," she read slowly. "Good. Know what it means? Making soil better for growing things?" "Exactly." Cade leaned back in his chair, watching her. "You're getting good at this. Better than I expected." "You didn't think I could learn?" "I knew you could learn, just didn't know how fast you'd pick it up." He paused. "You're smart, Alara. Smarter than you think you are." The compliment hit her harder than it should have. She'd been called a lot of things in her life, worthless, stupid, ugly, lazy, but never smart. "My pa used to say I was too dumb to pour water out of a boot if the instructions were written on the heel," she said, trying to make it sound like a joke. Cade's expression hardened. "Your pa was wrong about you. About everything." The sooner you stop believing his bullshit, the better off you'll be. It's hard to just stop believing something you heard your whole life. I know, but you gotta try. Because those voices in your head, his voice, your brother's, all of them telling you you're nothing, they're the enemy. More dangerous than any bear or mountain lion. He tapped the almanac. This right here? You learning to read? That's you fighting back. Every word you learn is proof they were wrong. She blinked hard, fighting the sting in her eyes. Why do you care? Why does it matter to you if I believe them or not? Because I've seen what happens when people believe the worst about themselves. They stop trying, stop fighting, and I didn't bring you up here to watch you give up on yourself. I'm not giving up. I know. But you gotta do more than just survive, Ilara. You gotta believe you deserve better than survival. She didn't know what to say to that. The idea that she deserved anything, good or bad, was so foreign it felt like he was speaking another language. But she kept reading, kept learning, because even if she didn't fully believe him yet, some part of her wanted to. November came hard and fast, bringing snow that fell in thick, heavy flakes and didn't melt. The temperature dropped until the mornings felt like stepping into a frozen river, and Ilara's breath fogged in the cabin even with the fire going. They worked from before dawn until after dark, racing against the weather. Cade taught her to smoke meat, to pack snow around the cabin's foundation for extra insulation, to recognize the signs of frostbite and hypothermia. He was relentless, demanding, pushing her harder than she'd ever been pushed. "You're being too rough on her," she heard him mutter to himself one night when he thought she was asleep. "She's trying." But the next morning he was just as hard on her as before, and she understood why. Winter up here wasn't something you could be soft about. It would kill you if you weren't ready. One evening, while they were eating dinner, they heard horses. Cade went still, his hand moving to the rifle by the door. "Get in the corner," he said quietly. "Don't come out unless I tell you to." "What?" "Now, Ilara." She moved to the corner, her heart hammering, and watched as Cade opened the door with the rifle in his hands. Two men on horseback stood in the clearing. Even in the dim light, Ilara recognized them. Her father and Garrett. "Evening, Ashen," Silas said. His voice was too loud, too jovial. He was drunk. "Came to collect what's mine." "Nothing of yours here," Cade said evenly. "You sold her. Deal's done." "That wasn't a legal sale, and you know it. She's my daughter. I got rights." "You got nothing. Now get off my land." Garrett leaned forward in his saddle. "We ain't leaving without her." "Then I guess you ain't leaving." Cade raised the rifle just enough to make his point. "I'll give you to the count of 3 to turn those horses around." "You threatening us?" "I'm making a promise." 1. Silas's face flushed red. "You can't just steal a man's daughter." 2. "Pa, maybe we should—" Garrett started. Cade pulled back the hammer on the rifle. 3. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the wind in the pines and the nervous stamping of the horses. Then Silas spat into the snow. "This ain't over, Ashen. She's my blood. I got a right to her." "You got nothing. And if I see you on my land again, I won't count. I'll just shoot." Silas jerked his horse's head around. "Come on, Garrett. Let's get out of here before this lunatic kills us." They rode off into the darkness, and Cade stood in the doorway until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Then he lowered the rifle and closed the door. His hands were shaking. Ilara came out of the corner. "Are you—" "I'm fine." But his voice was tight, strained. He set the rifle down and braced his hands on the table. "I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm glad you didn't shoot them." "I would have if they'd pushed it. You know that, right? I wasn't bluffing." "I know." He looked at her, and there was something raw in his expression. "They're not going to stop, Ilara. Your father's the kind of man who can't let go of something he thinks belongs to him. He'll be back." "What do we do?" "We get ready. Because next time they come, it won't be just the 2 of them. They'll bring more men, and we need to be ready to make a stand." The word hung in the air between them. "Sant," like this was a war and they were soldiers. Maybe they were. "Teach me to shoot better," Ilara said. "Not just at targets. Teach me like you mean it." Cade studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right. We'll start tomorrow." True to his word, the next morning he took her out past the eastern ridge, to a small hollow he used for target practice. He set up tin cans on a fallen log and handed her the rifle. "Forget what I taught you before," he said. "That was for hunting. This is different. This is about stopping a man who means you harm." "I don't know if I can shoot a person." "You won't know until you have to. But I'd rather you be ready and not need it than need it and not be ready." He taught her to aim for the chest, center mass, where she was most likely to hit something vital. Taught her to breathe through the recoil, to fire and chamber another round smoothly, to keep moving after the shot so she wasn't a stationary target. "Don't think of it as shooting a person," he said. "Think of it as protecting yourself. Your right to exist, because that's what it comes down to, you or them." She practiced until her shoulder was bruised from the recoil and her ears were ringing. By the end of the session, she could hit the cans more often than not. "Good," Cade said, "but cans don't shoot back. Remember that." That night, as they sat by the fire, Ilara said, "Do you think they'll really come back?" "Yeah, I do." "When?" "Hard to say. Could be tomorrow. Could be spring. But they'll come." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Your father's got pride, even if it's the only thing he's got. And you walking away from him hurt that pride. He'll want to make you pay for it." "I didn't do anything wrong." "I know, but men like him don't see it that way. To him, you're a possession that got away, and he'll do whatever it takes to get you back, not because he loves you, but because he can't stand losing." Ilara pulled her knees up to her chest. "I hate him." "That's fair. I hate that I'm related to him, that his blood's in my veins, that when I look in the mirror, I see his eyes looking back at me. You're not him, Ilara. You'll never be him. You got his eyes, maybe, but that's where the resemblance ends." "How do you know?" "Because he's a coward who sells his daughter to cover his debts, and you're up here learning to survive with bleeding hands and a sore back. Because when I gave you a choice, you chose the hard road instead of the easy one. That takes guts he'll never have." She wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe she was fundamentally different from the man who'd raised her. But some small poisonous part of her whispered that maybe the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Maybe she was just as broken and worthless as he'd always said. "Stop that," Cade said. "Stop what?" "Whatever you're thinking right now that's making you look like you want to crawl into a hole. I can see it on your face." She almost laughed. "You don't know what I'm thinking. I got a pretty good idea, and I'm telling you to stop. Those thoughts aren't helping anything. I can't just turn them off." "No, but you can choose not to feed them. Every time that voice in your head tells you you're worthless, you counter it with something true, something you know for a fact." He leaned forward. "You chopped 2 cords of wood this week. You can read 100 words you couldn't read 2 months ago. You hit 7 out of 10 shots today. Those are facts. They don't care what your father thinks." It was such a simple thing, but it hit her like a revelation. Facts. Things she could point to and say, "I did that. I learned that. I am capable of that." "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For seeing me. The real me, not the thing my father made me believe I was." Cade looked uncomfortable, like he always did when she got too sincere. "I'm just telling you what's obvious to anyone with eyes. It's not obvious to me. Then I'll keep reminding you until it is." They sat in silence after that, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters and sending snow swirling past the window. Winter had truly arrived, and with it, the knowledge that everything they'd built together was about to be tested in ways neither of them could fully predict. But for now, in this moment, sitting by the fire with a man who'd shown her more kindness than her own family ever had, Ilara felt something she'd never felt before. She felt like she belonged somewhere, and she'd be damned if she let anyone take that away from her. The snow kept coming. By mid-December, it was piled so high against the cabin walls that Ilara had to shovel a path to the stable every morning just to feed the horses. The world had shrunk to the size of their clearing, everything beyond it erased by white. Cade grew quieter as the days shortened, spending long stretches staring out the window at the mountains like he was reading something written in the ridges. Ilara had learned not to interrupt these silences. He'd talk when he was ready. One morning, while she was hauling water from the creek, she saw tracks in the snow. Boot prints, not animal. fresh enough that the edges hadn't softened yet. She dropped the bucket and ran back to the cabin. Cade was cleaning the rifle when she burst through the door. "Someone's been here," she said, breathing hard. "Down by the creek, boot prints heading east." He set the rifle down and grabbed his coat. "Show me." They followed the tracks together, Cade reading them like words on a page. He crouched in the snow, touching the edge of one print with his finger. "2 men," he said. "Maybe 3. Heavy boots, worn heels. One of them's dragging his left foot a little." He stood, his jaw tight. They were watching the cabin, stayed behind those trees for a while, then headed back down the valley. "My father?" "Can't say for sure, but I'd bet money on it." He looked at her. "They're scouting, figuring out our routine when we're vulnerable." "What do we do?" "We don't give them the chance to find out." He started back toward the cabin. "From now on, one of us is always armed. We don't both go outside at the same time, and we set up some surprises for anyone who comes up that trail uninvited." Over the next 2 days, Cade rigged tripwires strung with bells along the approaches to the cabin. He positioned rocks and logs that could be kicked loose to create noise. He taught Alara the sight lines from the cabin windows, showed her where someone could hide and where they'd be exposed. "You're turning this place into a fort," she said, watching him work. "Better a fort than a grave." That night, neither of them slept much. Alara lay in the bed pretending, listening to Cade shift on his pallet by the fire. Every creak of the cabin settling sounded like footsteps. Every gust of wind sounded like voices. Dawn came gray and cold. Cade made coffee strong enough to strip paint, and they sat at the table not talking, just waiting. The bells rang just after noon. Alara's head snapped up. Cade was already moving, rifle in hand, positioning himself by the window. "Stay low," he said. "Get your gun." She grabbed the smaller rifle he'd given her and crouched by the opposite window. Through the gap in the shutters, she could see movement in the trees. Men on foot, at least 4 of them, spreading out to surround the cabin. "Ashen!" Her father's voice cut through the cold air. "We just want to talk." Cade said nothing. "Come on now, be reasonable. She's my daughter. I got a right to see her." Still Cade stayed silent, his eyes tracking the men as they moved closer. Alara could see them now, Silas and Garrett, plus 2 others she didn't recognize. One had a shotgun. The other carried a length of rope. Her stomach turned. They'd brought rope. They meant to take her by force. "Last chance, Ashen. Send her out or we're coming in." Cade's finger moved to the trigger. "You set foot on my porch," he called out, his voice carrying across the snow, "and I'll put a bullet in you. That's a promise. You can't shoot all of us." "Don't need to shoot all of you, just need to shoot you." There was a pause. Alara could see Silas conferring with the others, his arms gesturing wildly. Then Garrett stepped forward, his hands raised. "We don't want trouble," Garrett said. "Just let us talk to her. 5 minutes. That's all we're asking." "She doesn't want to talk to you." "How about we let her decide that?" Garrett's voice had an edge to it now. "Or are you keeping her prisoner up here?" Cade glanced at Alara. She could read the question in his eyes. "Your call." She thought about staying silent, thought about letting Cade handle this like he'd handled everything else. But these were her demons, her past. And if she was ever going to be free of them, she had to face them herself. She stood up. "Alara, don't—" Cade started. "I'm not hiding anymore." She moved to the door. "They want to talk? Fine. We'll talk." She opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, Cade right behind her with the rifle still raised. The cold hit her like a slap, but she barely felt it. All she could see was her father standing there in the snow, looking older and meaner than she remembered. "There she is," Silas said, something like relief crossing his face. "Baby girl, we've been worried sick." "Don't." The word came out hard and flat. "Don't call me that. Don't pretend you were worried. You sold me, Pa, for $60 and a gambling debt. Now that ain't fair. I was drunk. I wasn't thinking straight. You're always drunk. And you knew exactly what you were doing." Garrett stepped forward. "Look, what's done is done. But your family, Alara. You belong with us, not up here with some stranger playing house in the woods. Cade's not a stranger, and this is more of a home than I ever had with you." "He's got you brainwashed," Silas said, his voice turning nasty. "Got you thinking you're better than your own blood." I don't think I'm better than anyone. I just know I deserve better than being sold like livestock. You ungrateful little... Silas started toward the porch. Cade's rifle swung toward him. That's far enough. This is family business. Not anymore, it isn't. Cade's voice was ice. She made her choice. You got your money. Now get off my land before I make you. One of the men Alara didn't recognize spoke up. We could rush him, 4 against 1. Try it, Cade said. See what happens. The man with the shotgun started to raise it. Everything seemed to slow down. Alara saw Cade's finger tighten on the trigger, saw her father's face twist with rage, saw Garrett reaching for something in his coat. Then she stepped in front of Cade. Stop! Her voice rang out across the clearing. All of you, just stop! Alara, move, Cade said behind her. No! She looked at her father, at her brother, at the 2 men who'd probably been promised money or whiskey for helping. You want to take me back? Fine. But you're going to have to go through me to do it. And I'm not some scared girl in a saloon anymore. I know how to shoot. I know how to fight. And I will do both before I let you drag me back to that life. You're my daughter, Silas said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. No, I was your daughter. I was your... But you gave up that right when you traded me for poker chips. She felt something break loose inside her chest, something that had been knotted tight for 23 years. I'm not for sale. Not anymore. Not ever again. And if you can't accept that, if you can't leave me alone, then I guess we're going to have a problem. Big talk from a girl who couldn't even write her own name a few months ago, Garrett sneered. I can write it now. She pulled out the folded piece of birch bark she'd been keeping in her pocket, the one she'd practiced on that first night. Elara, that's me, and I'm the one who gets to decide what happens to me from here on out. Silas looked at her like he was seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. The girl he'd sold wasn't standing on this porch. That girl was gone. You'll regret this, he said finally. You'll come crawling back when winter gets hard and you realize you can't make it out here. If I come back, it'll be because I chose to. Not because you dragged me. That's the difference. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Silas spat in the snow and turned away. Come on, we're wasting our time here. Pa, Garrett started. I said, come on. She wants to freeze to death up here with this lunatic. Let her. She ain't worth the trouble. The 4 men retreated down the trail, their footsteps crunching in the snow. Alara watched them go until they disappeared into the trees. Her whole body was shaking, but not from the cold. You all right? Cade asked quietly. Yeah, I think so. She turned to look at him. Did I just make things worse? No. You made them clear. That was necessary. They'll come back. Maybe. Or maybe they'll give up. Men like your father, they're good at big talk but bad at follow-through. Now that you've shown you're not scared of them, they might decide you're not worth the effort. You don't really believe that. No, but it's possible. He lowered the rifle. Either way, you did good out there. Stood your ground. That took guts. She laughed, and it came out shaky. I was terrified. I know. That's what made it brave. He put a hand on her shoulder, brief and warm. Come on. Let's get inside before we both freeze. They spent the rest of the day in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Alara kept replaying the confrontation in her head, hearing her own voice saying the words she'd needed to say for years. I'm not for sale. She'd meant it, every word. But that night, lying in bed, doubt crept in. What if her father was right? What if she couldn't make it through winter? What if she was just fooling herself, playing at being strong when really she was the same worthless girl she'd always been? You're thinking too loud, Cade said from his pallet. Sorry. Stop apologizing and stop doubting yourself. How do you know that's what I'm doing? Because I know that look. You get it sometimes when you think I'm not watching. She heard him shift. You faced down your father today, told him the truth. And you're still here, still breathing, still in one piece. That's proof you're stronger than he ever gave you credit for. What if I'm not? What if I just got lucky today and next time... There's no such thing as luck in a situation like that. There's preparation and there's courage. You had both. He paused. Stop waiting for permission to believe in yourself, Alara. Nobody's going to give it to you. You just got to take it. She lay there in the dark, turning his words over in her mind. Take it, like confidence was something you could grab with both hands and claim as your own. Maybe it was. The weeks that followed brought a different kind of tension. Cade doubled their watch schedule, made sure they were never both asleep at the same time. He taught Alara to move quietly through the snow, to recognize the difference between animal tracks and human ones, to trust her instincts when something felt wrong. "You're turning me into you," she said one afternoon while they were checking the trap lines. "What's that mean?" "Suspicious. Careful. Always looking over my shoulder. That's not being me. That's being smart." He knelt to reset a snare. World's a dangerous place, especially for women on their own. The more you know about protecting yourself, the better. I'm not on my own. I've got you. He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "You won't always have me." The words hit her harder than they should have. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Means exactly what I said. I'm teaching you to survive because one day you might need to do it without me. That's just reality." "Are you planning on going somewhere?" "No. But life doesn't ask permission before it takes people away. My pa died in a mining accident when I was 12. My sister drowned herself at 20. My ma got pneumonia and was gone in 3 days. I learned a long time ago not to count on anyone being around forever." Alara felt something cold settle in her chest. She hadn't thought about Cade dying, hadn't let herself think about what would happen if she lost the one person who'd shown her kindness without asking for anything in return. "I'd be lost without you," she said quietly. "No, you wouldn't. You'd figure it out. You're tougher than you think." He stood, brushing snow off his knees. "But that's why I'm teaching you everything I know, so if something happens to me, you'll be all right. Nothing's going to happen to you. You don't know that. I know you're too stubborn to die." He smiled at that, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Maybe so, but stubborn only gets you so far." They walked back to the cabin in silence, and Alara found herself watching Cade more closely. The way he moved through the snow with the confidence of someone who knew this land in his bones. The way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, always alert, always ready. The gray in his hair that seemed more pronounced than it had been a month ago. He wasn't young, and the life he lived was hard. How many more winters did he have in him? How many more seasons of chopping wood and hauling water and fighting off men who wanted what was his? She pushed the thoughts away. She couldn't afford to think about losing him. Not now. Christmas came and went unmarked except for Cade roasting a goose he'd shot and Alara making bread with some of their precious white flour. They ate in comfortable silence, the cabin warm from the fire, the world outside locked in ice. "You ever celebrate Christmas growing up?" Cade asked. "Sometimes. When Ma was alive, she'd make a special dinner. After she died, Pa usually just got drunk and mean." Alara picked at her bread. "What about you?" "My ma used to sing carols. Can't remember the words anymore, but I remember the sound of her voice." He looked into the fire. "That was a long time ago." "Do you miss her?" "Every day, but missing someone doesn't bring them back. You just got to keep living anyway." They sat there as the fire burned low, two people who'd both lost more than they'd gained, who'd found something unexpected in each other's company. Alara realized she was happy. Not the wild, temporary happiness of a good surprise, but the steady, deep happiness of being exactly where she was supposed to be. She didn't say it out loud. Cade would probably just grunt and change the subject. But she felt it, and that was enough. January brought storms that lasted for days, winds that howled through the valley like something alive and angry. They were trapped inside the cabin for stretches so long, Alara started to feel like the walls were closing in. But Cade kept her busy with lessons, reading, writing, arithmetic, anything to keep their minds occupied. "If you can read and figure numbers, you can do anything," he said. "Run a business, keep accounts, make sure nobody cheats you." "I don't want to run a business." "What do you want?" The question caught her off guard. She'd spent so long just trying to survive that she'd never thought about wanting anything beyond that. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe just this. A place where I can work and learn and not have to be afraid all the time." "That's a good thing to want?" "What about you? What do you want?" He considered the question, his fingers absently tracing patterns on the table. Peace, I guess. A place where I can be left alone, where I don't have to answer to anybody or explain myself. You've got that here. Most days, yeah, but the world has a way of not leaving you alone, even when you want it to. He looked at her. That's why we gotta be ready, because peace is something you have to fight for, which is a funny kind of contradiction, but there it is. The next morning, Alara woke to Cade coughing. Deep, wet coughs that shook his whole body. He tried to wave her off when she asked if he was all right, but she could see the flush in his cheeks, the brightness in his eyes that spoke of fever. You're sick, she said. I'm fine. Just a cold. That's not just a cold. Get back in bed. There's work to do. I'll do it. You're burning up. She put her hand on his forehead and felt the heat radiating off him. When's the last time you were sick? Can't remember. Years. That worried her more than she wanted to admit. Cade was tough as iron, weathered by years of hard living. If something was strong enough to put him down, it wasn't a minor thing. She made him lie down on the bed and covered him with every fur and blanket in the cabin. Then she went outside into the bitter cold and did all the work herself, feeding the horses, chopping wood, checking the traps. Her hands cramped from the cold and her shoulders ached from the axe, but she kept going. When she came back inside hours later, Cade was worse. The fever had climbed higher and he was shivering despite all the blankets. He tried to sit up when she came in, but she pushed him back down. Stay put. I've got this. You can't do everything. Watch me. She made him drink water, forced him to eat broth even though he said he wasn't hungry. She kept the fire going and the cabin warm. And when night fell and his fever spiked so high he started talking to people who weren't there, she sat beside the bed with a wet cloth, cooling his forehead and praying to nothing in particular that he'd make it through. Sarah, he mumbled, his eyes unfocused. Sarah, I'm sorry. Shh. I'm here. You're all right. Couldn't save you. Couldn't. His hand gripped hers with surprising strength. I'm sorry. It's okay. Rest now. She sat with him through the night, watching his chest rise and fall, checking his pulse, trying not to think about what she'd do if he died. This man who'd saved her, taught her, shown her what it meant to be treated with basic human decency. If she lost him now, she didn't know if she could bear it. But as dawn broke, the fever finally broke too. Cade's eyes cleared and he looked at her, really looked at her, and she felt relief so strong it made her dizzy. How long was I out? He asked, his voice hoarse. A day and a half. You scared the hell out of me. Sorry. He tried to sit up and she helped him, propping him against the wall. Did you keep the fires going? Feed the horses? I did everything, just like you taught me. He looked at her with something like pride. Told you you'd figure it out. Don't you dare say I told you so right now. He smiled weakly. Wouldn't dream of it. She made him more broth and watched him eat, and somewhere in the middle of it all, she realized something had shifted between them. It wasn't just teacher and student anymore, wasn't just two people sharing space out of convenience. It was something deeper than that, something that didn't have a name but felt as solid as the mountains outside. She didn't say anything about it. Neither did he. But it was there, in the way he looked at her, in the way she found herself watching over him while he slept. They'd become something to each other, and that scared her more than facing down her father ever had. Because caring about someone meant you could lose them, and loss was a kind of pain she wasn't sure she was ready to feel again. Cade recovered slowly, too slowly for his liking. He tried to go back to work after 3 days, made it as far as the woodpile before his legs gave out, and Alara had to help him back inside. He cursed the whole way, furious at his own weakness. I should be doing this, he muttered, collapsing onto the chair. You shouldn't have to carry everything. Well, I am carrying it, so stop complaining and let me. She poured him water. You'd do the same for me. That's different. How? He didn't have an answer for that, which told her everything she needed to know. He'd spent so long being the strong one, the provider, that accepting help felt like failure to him. But over the next week, he didn't have a choice. The fever had taken more out of him than either of them expected. His strength came back in pieces, and until it did, Alara ran everything. She chopped wood until her back screamed. She hauled water from the creek even when the buckets felt like they were full of lead. She checked the traps, skinned what she caught, kept the fire going and the cabin warm. At night, she'd collapse into bed so tired she could barely move. But there was something satisfying about the exhaustion. She was doing it, all of it, and the cabin was still standing. "You're getting good at this," Cade said one evening, watching her cook dinner. He was up and moving again, but still weak, still needing to rest more than he wanted to. "Had a good teacher." "I didn't teach you to be this stubborn." "Pretty sure I came with that already installed." She stirred the pot. "My ma used to say I was the most hard-headed baby she ever tried to birth. Nearly killed us both." "She sounds like she was tough." "She was. Until the end, anyway." Alara's throat tightened. "I wish she could have seen this. Me, up here, doing all this. She always said I was capable of more than Pa would let me be." She was right. They ate in comfortable silence, and Alara found herself studying Cade when he wasn't looking. The illness had aged him, carved deeper lines around his eyes and mouth. He moved like someone who was aware of their own mortality now, careful in ways he hadn't been before. It scared her more than she wanted to admit. February came with cold so brutal it felt like the air itself could cut you. The snow was piled higher than the cabin windows, and some mornings they had to dig their way out just to reach the stable. Alara's hands were raw and cracked despite the salve, and there were days when every breath hurt her lungs. But she kept going, because stopping wasn't an option. Then, 3 weeks after Cade had gotten sick, he went outside to check the horses and didn't come back. Alara waited 10 minutes, then 20. Then she grabbed her coat and went looking. She found him collapsed in the stable, blood seeping through his pant leg, where he'd caught it on a piece of jagged metal sticking out from the wall. He was conscious but pale, his jaw clenched against the pain. "Stupid," he muttered when he saw her. "Wasn't paying attention." "Stop talking. Let me see it." The gash was deep, running from his knee to mid-thigh. Blood was everywhere, soaking through the fabric, dripping into the straw. Alara's first instinct was panic. Then training kicked in. Cade had taught her basic field medicine, how to clean wounds, how to stitch them, how to recognize when something was beyond saving. This wasn't beyond saving, but it was bad. "Can you walk?" she asked. "Don't think so. Lost too much blood." "Then I'm getting you back to the cabin. Hold still." She got her shoulder under his arm and half carried, half dragged him across the clearing. He was heavy, dead weight heavy, and by the time they made it inside, her muscles were shaking from the effort. She got him onto the bed and cut away his pant leg. The wound was worse than she'd thought. Ragged edges, deep enough that she could see muscle. It needed stitches, a lot of them. "There's a needle and thread in the medical kit," Cade said through gritted teeth. "And whiskey. You're going to need both." Her hands were shaking as she gathered the supplies. She'd watched Cade stitch up a wound on his hand once, but watching and doing were different things. "I don't know if I can do this," she said. "You can. You have to." He looked at her, his eyes clear despite the pain. "I trust you, Alara. You got this." She poured whiskey over the needle and thread, then poured more directly into the wound. Cade's whole body went rigid, and he sucked in a breath so sharp it sounded like he'd been stabbed. "Sorry," she whispered. "Just do it. Quick is better than gentle." She pushed the needle through his skin, and he made a sound like an animal in a trap. Her stomach lurched, but she kept going, pulling the thread through, making the stitch tight. Then another, and another. Blood kept welling up, making it hard to see what she was doing. Her hands were slick with it, and the needle kept slipping in her fingers. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. By the time she finished, there were 16 stitches holding the wound closed, and Cade had passed out from the pain. Alara bandaged his leg with strips of clean cloth, then sat back and let herself shake. She'd just stitched a man back together, actually put a needle through human skin and pulled it tight and made it hold. Her mother would have been proud. That night was the longest of her life. Cade's fever came back with a vengeance, and she sat beside him with wet cloths and water, trying to keep him cool, trying to keep him alive. His legs swelled up angry and red, and she changed the bandages every few hours, pouring more whiskey over the stitches even though it made him scream in his sleep. "Don't you die on me," she told him sometime around midnight. "You hear me, Cade Ashen? You don't get to teach me all this just to leave me alone up here. You don't get to do that." He didn't answer, just kept burning with fever, his body fighting something she couldn't see. 3 days later, the fever broke again. Cade opened his eyes and looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her want to cry. "You're still here," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Where else would I be? Most people would have run, left me to die and saved themselves. I'm not most people." She helped him drink water. "And you're not dying. Not if I have anything to say about it." He managed a weak smile. "Bossy." "Damn right." The wound healed slowly, and infection set in twice despite all her efforts to keep it clean. There were days when Cade couldn't put any weight on the leg, when the pain was so bad he couldn't hide it no matter how hard he tried. And through it all, Alara ran everything. She learned to do the work of two people, learned to push past exhaustion, past the point where her body was screaming at her to stop, learned that she was capable of more than she'd ever imagined. The trap lines, the wood, the water, the horses, the cooking, the cleaning, the nursing. All of it fell on her shoulders, and she carried it. Some days she wanted to scream, wanted to throw down the axe and the buckets and just collapse in the snow and give up. But she didn't, because Cade was depending on her, and she'd be damned if she let him down. "You're going to work yourself to death," he said one afternoon, watching her stagger in with another load of firewood. "Not planning on it. Alara, you gotta rest. You're running on fumes. I'll rest when you can walk again." She dropped the wood by the fire. "Until then, somebody's got to keep this place running." "I'm sorry. I should be helping." "You're healing. That's your job right now. Mine is everything else." He looked at her with something like wonder. "When did you get so tough?" "When I had to." She sat down heavily, every muscle in her body protesting. "You taught me that, survive or die, no middle ground. I didn't mean for you to have to do it alone." "I'm not alone, you're still here, that's enough." But the truth was, she was alone in ways she'd never been before. Every decision fell to her, every problem was hers to solve. And there were moments, usually late at night when Cade was asleep and she was lying awake listening to the wind, when the weight of it all felt crushing. What if she made the wrong choice? What if she missed something important? What if her inexperience killed them both? She couldn't afford to think like that. So she pushed the doubts down and kept moving forward, one day at a time, one task at a time. March arrived with weather that couldn't decide if it wanted to be winter or spring. Some days the sun was warm enough to melt the snow into rivers of slush. Other days it snowed so hard they couldn't see the trees 50 feet from the cabin. Cade was walking again, using a stick for support, but his leg was never going to be the same. It had healed crooked, and he had a permanent limp now that made him wince with every step. "Should have been more careful," he muttered, watching Alara split wood while he sat on a stump. "Stupid mistake." "You're human. Humans make mistakes. Can't afford mistakes up here." "We're still alive, aren't we?" She swung the axe. "That's all that matters." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You saved my life, you know. The stitches, the nursing, all of it. I would have died without you." "Then I guess we're even. You saved mine first." "That's not the same thing." "Why not?" "Because I just gave you a choice. You kept me breathing." He looked at her with something raw in his expression. "I won't forget that." She didn't know what to say to that, so she just kept chopping wood. But his words stayed with her, warming something deep in her chest that had been cold for as long as she could remember. They'd saved each other. And maybe that was what mattered most. The snow started to melt in earnest as March wore on, revealing a world that had been buried for months. The creek swelled with runoff, and the first green shoots started pushing up through the dead grass around the cabin. Alara felt something shift in her chest. They'd made it. Through the fever and the injury and the brutal cold and her father's threats. They'd survived. One morning, she walked outside and heard birds singing for the first time in months. The air smelled like wet earth and pine instead of just ice, and the sun on her face felt like a promise. Cade came out to stand beside her, leaning on his stick. "We did it," he said quietly. "Yeah, we did. You did most of it. We both did what we needed to do." She looked at him. "How's the leg?" "Hurts. Probably always will." He tested his weight on it and grimaced. But I'm alive to feel it hurt, so I'm not complaining. You complain plenty. That's different. That's just me being ornery. She laughed, and it felt good. When was the last time she'd laughed? Weeks, maybe. Everything had been so grim, so focused on just getting through the next day. But now, standing in the weak spring sunlight with Cade beside her and the world waking up around them, she felt something like hope. What do we do now? She asked. Now we rebuild. Fix what broke over the winter. Plant a garden. Get ready for next year. You think my father will come back? Cade was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I don't know. He might have given up, or he might be waiting for better weather. He looked at her. But whatever happens, we'll handle it. Together. Together. The words settled around her like a warm coat. They spent the next few weeks repairing winter's damage. The stable roof needed patching. The chicken coop Cade had been building before he got hurt needed finishing. The garden plot needed turning over and clearing. Cade did what he could, but his leg limited him. Most of the heavy work still fell to Alara, and she tackled it with the same grim determination that had gotten her through the winter. She was stronger now, could swing an axe for hours without her arms giving out, could haul loads that would have flattened her 4 months ago. Her body had changed, hardened by constant work, and she barely recognized herself in the mirror anymore. The soft, scared girl who'd walked out of that saloon was gone. In her place was someone tougher, someone who knew what she was capable of. One afternoon, while they were working on the garden, Cade said, "You ever think about what comes next? After all this?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, you could leave if you wanted. You know enough now to make it on your own. Could head to a different town, start over where nobody knows you." The suggestion hit her like cold water. "Is that what you want, for me to leave?" "No, but I want you to know you have the choice. You're not stuck here with me out of necessity anymore." She stabbed her shovel into the dirt. "You trying to get rid of me?" "I'm trying to make sure you're here because you want to be, not because you think you owe me something." "I don't think I owe you. I think—" She struggled to find the right words. "I think this is where I belong. Here, doing this. With you." He looked at her for a long moment. "You sure about that?" "More sure than I've been about anything in my life." Something shifted in his expression, something she couldn't quite read. Then he nodded and went back to digging. "All right then, let's get this garden planted." But the conversation stayed with her. The idea that she could leave, that she had options now, was both liberating and terrifying. She could go anywhere, be anyone. The world was open to her in ways it had never been before. And yet, the thought of leaving this cabin, this mountain, this man who taught her what it meant to be free, it felt wrong, like walking away from the only home she'd ever truly had. She didn't want to go. She wanted to stay. And that realization was both simple and profound. This was her choice. Not her father's, not circumstances, not desperation, hers. And she was choosing to stay. April brought a visitor neither of them expected. They were outside working when they heard a horse on the trail. Cade grabbed his rifle instinctively, positioning himself between Alara and the sound. But the man who rode into the clearing wasn't Silas or Garrett. He was older, wearing a badge on his vest, and his hands were raised to show he wasn't armed. "Cade Ashen," he called out. "Depends who's asking." "Marshal Ben Cordell. I'm not here for trouble. Just need to ask you some questions." Cade didn't lower the rifle. "What kind of questions?" "About Silas Vance and his daughter." The marshal's eyes found Alara. "That'd be you, I'm guessing." Alara's heart started pounding. "What about my father?" "He's dead. Him and his son both. Shot each other in a drunken fight 3 weeks ago." The marshal dismounted slowly. "Before he died, your brother said something about you being up here. Said maybe you had something to do with it." "That's horseshit," Cade said. "We haven't been down the mountain in months." "I know. Already checked with folks in town. They confirmed you haven't been around." The marshal looked at Alara. "But I needed to see for myself. Make sure you weren't being held against your will." "I'm not. I'm here because I want to be." "He treating you right?" "Better than anyone ever has." The marshal studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. That's all I needed to know." He turned back to Cade. "For what it's worth, nobody in town's going to miss Silas Vance. He was a mean drunk who owed money to half the county. World's probably better off without him. Alara felt something break loose in her chest. Her father was dead. The man who'd sold her, beaten her, made her believe she was worthless, gone. She should feel something. Relief, maybe, or grief, or anger. But all she felt was numb. "You all right?" Cade asked after the marshal rode away. "I don't know. Should I be sad?" "No rule says you have to feel anything about a man who treated you like garbage." "He was still my father. Being someone's blood doesn't make them family. Family is who shows up, who takes care of you, who sees you as a person, not property." He put his hand on her shoulder. "Whatever you're feeling or not feeling, it's all right. You don't owe him your grief." She leaned into his touch, drawing strength from it. "I thought I'd feel different when he was gone. Like I'd be free. But I've been free since the day I left that saloon. He just didn't know it." "That's the truth." They stood there in the quiet, and Alara realized that her father's death changed nothing. She was already free, already building a life on her own terms. And no ghost was going to take that from her. "Come on," she said. "We've got work to do." And they did. Because that's what freedom was. The ability to choose your work, your life, your path forward. And Alara had chosen this mountain, this cabin, this man who'd shown her what she was capable of becoming. She'd become someone who survived, someone who fought, someone who refused to be broken. And winter had forged that person in ice and fire, blood and sweat, pain and determination. She was no longer the girl her father had sold. She was Alara Vance, and she belonged to no one but herself. Spring turned the mountain into something wild and alive. Wildflowers erupted in patches of purple and yellow across the meadows, and the creek ran so full and fast it sounded like constant thunder. Alara planted the garden with seeds Cade had been saving: beans, squash, potatoes, carrots. She worked the soil with her hands, feeling it crumble between her fingers, dark and rich and full of possibility. "You're good at this," Cade said, watching her from where he sat mending a harness. His leg was better, but still bothered him on cold mornings, and he'd learned to pace himself. "It's just dirt and seeds." "It's more than that. It's planning ahead, believing there's going to be a future worth planting for." He tied off the leather strap. "Not everyone can do that." She sat back on her heels, looking at the neat rows she'd made. "I never thought about the future before. It was always just getting through the day. And now? Now I think about what this place could be. A real garden, maybe some chickens, enough food stored that we're not scraping by every winter." She paused. "I think about staying." "You are staying." "I mean for good. Not just until something better comes along, but actually making a life here." Cade set down the harness and looked at her properly. "That what you want?" "Yeah, I think it is." She brushed dirt off her hands. "Unless you're tired of having me around." "Not tired of it. Just want to make sure you're thinking clear. Mountain life is hard, Alara. What we went through this winter, that's going to happen every year. The cold, the isolation, the work that never stops. And my leg ain't getting better. There's going to come a time when I can't pull my weight anymore. Then I'll pull it for you, same as I did this winter." "That's not fair to you." "Life's not fair. You taught me that." She stood and walked over to him. "I'm not some fragile thing that's going to break the first time things get hard. I already proved that. So stop trying to protect me from a life I'm choosing with my eyes wide open." He looked up at her, and something in his expression softened. "You really have changed. You made me better, stronger. I'm not going back to being that scared girl in the saloon." "You were never that girl. She was just hiding under all the fear." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "I'm glad you're staying." The touch lingered longer than it needed to, and Alara felt something shift between them. It had been building for months, in the way they moved around each other in the small cabin, in the comfortable silences, in the moments when their eyes met across the fire, and neither of them looked away. She pulled her hand back, her heart beating too fast. "I should finish planting." Yeah, you should." But the moment stayed with her all day, warm and uncertain and terrifying in equal measure. That night, after dinner, Cade pulled out a stack of papers he'd been keeping in a wooden box. "Got something to show you." "What is it?" "Deed to this land. Paid it off years ago. Back when land up here was cheap and nobody wanted it. He spread the papers on the table. I've been thinking. If something happens to me, this place should go to you. Cade, let me finish. I don't have any family left. No wife, no kids, nobody who'd claim this land except the bank. But you've put work into it, same as me. You've earned it. He pulled out another paper, fresh and unmarked. I want to add your name to the deed. Make you a legal owner. She stared at the papers, not quite believing what she was hearing. You'd give me half your land? I'd give you all of it if I thought you'd take it, but I know you too well, so half it is. He pushed the paper toward her. You can read it yourself. I already talked to the land office last time I was in town. Just needs both our signatures. Alara picked up the paper with shaking hands. The words swam in front of her eyes, but she could make out enough of them to understand what he was offering. Legal ownership. Her name on an official document that said this land belonged to her. Why? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Because you deserve something that's yours, something nobody can take from you. He handed her a pen. You don't have to decide right now. Think about it if you need to. But she didn't need to think about it. She took the pen, dipped it in ink, and carefully wrote her name on the line he indicated. The letters were neater than they would have been 6 months ago, formed with the confidence of someone who'd practiced until they got it right. Alara Vance. That was her. That was real. Cade signed his name below hers, and just like that, she owned land, had a stake in something permanent. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was building. Thank you, she said, and the words felt inadequate for what he'd just given her. Don't thank me. You earned it. He folded the papers and put them back in the box. This is your home now, Alara. Same as it's mine. Home. The word wrapped around her like a blanket, warm and safe and permanent. The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm that felt almost peaceful. They worked the land together, Cade teaching her things she'd never thought she'd need to know. How to read weather patterns, how to preserve food for next winter, how to recognize medicinal plants. She taught herself things too, experimenting with recipes, learning which vegetables grew best in their soil, figuring out how to stretch their supplies further. One afternoon, a woman rode up the trail on a tired-looking mule. She was middle-aged, weather-worn, with gray streaking through her dark hair. Cade greeted her like an old friend. Catherine, didn't expect to see you up here. Been meaning to visit. Heard you took in Silas Vance's girl. The woman's sharp eyes found Alara. That you? I'm Alara. Catherine Morris. I run a school down in Red Creek, about 20 miles south of Covenant Creek. She dismounted with a grunt. Been teaching up there for near 15 years now. What brings you all the way up here, Kes? Cade asked. Heard what you did. Taking that girl out of a bad situation, teaching her to read. Catherine looked at Alara again. How far along are you with your letters? I can read most things now, simple books anyway, and I can write well enough to keep accounts. Show me. Alara brought out the journal she'd been keeping, a record of their supplies, what they'd planted, what needed fixing around the property. Her handwriting was still rough but legible, and she'd started adding notes about things she'd learned. Catherine flipped through the pages, nodding to herself. This is good work, better than half the students I get who've been in school for years. She closed the journal. How'd you like to help me teach? The question caught Alara completely off guard. What? I need help at the school. Too many students, not enough hours in the day. And I could use someone who remembers what it's like to learn this stuff as an adult. Someone who won't make the slower kids feel stupid for not picking it up right away. Catherine looked at Cade. Pay isn't much, but it's steady. Room and board included if she wants it, or she could ride down once a week. That's up to Alara, Cade said. Catherine turned back to her. You interested? Alara's mind was racing. Teaching. She'd never thought of herself as someone who could teach others, who had knowledge worth passing on, but the idea of it sent a thrill through her. I'd have to think about it, she said carefully. Talk it over with Cade. Fair enough. Offer stands as long as you want it. Catherine climbed back on her mule. You've got a brain, girl. Be ashamed to waste it up here where nobody but him can see it. After Catherine left, Alara and Cade sat on the porch in silence. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. You should do it, Cade said finally. I don't know. Leaving you alone all day? I managed alone for 15 years before you showed up. I can manage again. He looked at her. This is a real opportunity, Alara. A way to make money, meet people, do something important. You'd be good at it. What if I'm not? What if I can't handle it? Then you'll figure it out, same as you figured out everything else. He shifted his bad leg, wincing slightly. I don't want you staying here because you think you have to take care of me. That's not why I brought you up here. I know, but I like taking care of this place. Working the land, building something. You can do both. Catherine said once a week. That leaves 6 days for here. She thought about it, turning the idea over in her mind. Teaching children to read and write, passing on the knowledge that had changed her own life. It felt important, meaningful in ways that went beyond just surviving. All right, she said, I'll try it. 1 day a week to start. Good. You'll be great at it. The first time Alara rode down to Red Creek alone, she was terrified. The trail felt longer without Cade beside her, and every shadow made her jump. But ash was steady beneath her, and by the time she reached the small settlement, her nerves had settled into something manageable. The school was a one-room building that had seen better days, with a leaking roof and windows that didn't quite close right. Inside, 15 children of various ages sat on rough benches, watching her with curious eyes. Catherine introduced her simply. This is Miss Alara. She's going to be helping me teach you your letters. The first day was chaos. The children tested her, acted out, ignored her instructions. But Alara remembered what it felt like to be talked down to be treated like you were stupid for not knowing something. So she was patient. She got down on their level. She showed them the same respect Cade had shown her. By the end of the day, she'd won over about half of them. The other half would take more time. You did well, Catherine said after the children had gone home. Better than I expected for a first day. They're stubborn. They're kids. Of course they're stubborn. Catherine handed her a small bag of coins. Your pay. Not much, but it's honest work. Alara looked at the money in her hand, the first she'd ever earned herself. Not given to her, not stolen, earned. The weight of it felt significant. Thank you, she said. Thank yourself. You're the one doing the work. Alara rode back to the mountain that evening with the coins in her pocket and a strange, unfamiliar feeling in her chest. Pride, maybe. Or purpose. Whatever it was, it felt good. Over the following months, teaching became the bright spot in her week. The children warmed to her, started calling her Miss Alara with genuine affection instead of mockery. She taught them to read, to write, to do sums. And in teaching them, she learned things about herself. That she had patience she didn't know she possessed. That she could command a room without raising her voice. That she was capable of shaping young minds. At home, the garden flourished. Cade's chickens, finally built and populated, started laying eggs. The cabin felt less like a survival shelter and more like a real home, with small touches Alara had added over time. Wildflowers in a jar on the table, curtains made from old fabric, a proper shelf for their growing collection of books. One evening in late summer, sitting on the porch watching the sunset, Cade said, "You're happy." "Yeah, I am." "Looks good on you." "I never knew I could be happy like this, just living a simple life, doing honest work." She looked at him. "You gave me that." "No. You made it for yourself. I just opened the door." "Still, without you, without me, you would have found another way. You're stubborn enough." But he was smiling when he said it. They sat in comfortable silence, and Alara realized this was what contentment felt like. Not constant excitement or drama, just the steady satisfaction of a life well lived. Work that mattered. A home that was truly hers. A future she could plan for. In September, Catherine offered her more days at the school. "The children love you, and honestly, you're a better teacher than I am for some of them. You've got a gift for reaching the ones who think they're too stupid to learn." "I don't have a gift. I just remember what it felt like." That's the gift. Empathy. Half of teaching is just giving a damn about whether they understand. Catherine leaned back in her chair. "I could use you 3 days a week if you're willing. Same pay per day." 3 days a week would mean more money, more impact, more time away from the mountain, but it would also mean less time with Cade, less time tending their land. She talked it over with him that night. Do it, he said without hesitation. This is your chance to make something of yourself beyond these mountains. I've already made something of myself, right here. Then make more. There's no rule that says you can only be one thing. He poked the fire with a stick. Besides, I've been thinking about expanding, maybe building another cabin for guests, folks who want to hunt or fish up here. I could use the space to work on that while you're gone. You want to run a hunting lodge? Why not? Land's good for it. And with your teaching money plus what I could make from rentals, we'd be set. Wouldn't have to scrape by every winter. The idea excited her more than she wanted to admit. Building something bigger than just survival. Creating a real business, a real life. All right, she said, 3 days a week. But you have to promise to take it easy on that leg. No heavy lifting without me here to help. Yes, ma'am. I'm serious, Cade. So am I. He looked at her with that expression she'd come to recognize, pride mixed with something deeper she couldn't quite name. We're going to build something good here, Alara. Something that lasts. And they did. Over the next year, the cabin on the mountain became something more than just a home. Cade built a second, smaller cabin for guests, and word spread that you could hunt the high country with an experienced guide who knew every ridge and valley. Alara taught 4 days a week now, saving every penny she earned. They worked together in the evenings, planning and building and dreaming out loud. The garden expanded, the chickens multiplied. They bought 2 more horses for the hunting business. Alara found herself measuring time differently now, not in days survived, but in things accomplished. Gardens planted, children taught, buildings raised, a life built piece by piece, choice by choice. One evening in early spring, almost 2 years after she'd first arrived, a young woman showed up on their doorstep. She couldn't have been more than 19 with a black eye and a baby in her arms. I heard there was a woman up here, the girl said, her voice shaking. Someone who got away from a bad situation. I need help, please. Alara looked at Cade. He nodded slightly. Come inside, Alara said. You're safe here. The girl's name was Mary, and her story was too familiar. A husband who drank and used his fists. A family that told her to be grateful for what she had. Nowhere else to go. They set her up in the guest cabin, gave her food and space and time to figure out what came next. Alara taught her the same things Cade had taught her. How to chop wood, how to shoot, how to read, how to believe she was worth more than what the world had told her. After 3 weeks, Mary decided to head west to join a cousin in California. Alara gave her money for the trip, her own money, earned from teaching, and watched her ride away with the baby, heading toward a future she chose for herself. That's going to keep happening, Cade said. Word's going to spread that there's a place up here where women can go to get back on their feet. Good. Let it spread. You know what that means, right? We'll be taking in strays like some kind of refuge. Then that's what we'll be. Alara looked at the mountain, at the home they'd built, at the life they'd made. We've got space. We've got knowledge. It seems selfish to keep it to ourselves. Cade smiled, slow and genuine. When'd you get so wise? Had a good teacher. Over the next year, 3 more women came. Some stayed a few weeks, some a few months. Alara taught them all what she'd learned, not just practical skills, but the harder lesson of believing in their own worth. The mountain became known as a place of second chances, a place where women who'd been beaten down could find their feet again. Alara didn't advertise it, but she didn't turn anyone away either. You're making a difference, Catherine told her one afternoon at the school. Those women you help, they're going out into the world and building lives. That matters. I'm just doing what was done for me. That's how it works. Someone shows you kindness, you pass it on. You're making ripples, Alara. They spread further than you think. That evening, Alara sat on the porch with Cade, watching the sun set behind the mountains. They did this most nights now, this quiet moment of just being together. You ever regret it? She asked. Walking into that saloon, buying me out of that situation? Not once. Even when I was useless at everything? You were never useless, just untrained. He looked at her. You know what I regret? Not doing it sooner. Should have gone in there the first time I saw your father treating you like garbage, but I didn't want to get involved. What changed your mind? You did. The way you looked that night, like you'd already given up on yourself. I couldn't walk away from that. He paused. My sister looked like that before she died. And I didn't save her, but I could save you. You did more than save me. You gave me a life worth living. We gave each other that. Don't sell yourself short." They sat in silence as the stars came out, and Alara felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was her life now. These mountains, this cabin, this man who'd seen worth in her when no one else had, the children she taught, the women she helped, the land she tended. She'd been sold across a gambling table for $60. But she'd bought herself back with blood and sweat and determination, and the life she'd built was worth more than any price her father could have named. "I love you," she said quietly. She hadn't planned to say it, but the words came out anyway, simple and true. Cade turned to look at her, something vulnerable in his eyes. "Took you long enough to figure that out." "You've known?" "For a while. Didn't want to say anything and spook you." He reached over and took her hand. "I love you too, Alara. Have for months. Maybe since that first winter when you stitched up my leg and kept me alive through sheer stubbornness. So what do we do about it? What do you want to do about it?" She thought about it, about what loving him meant. Not the romantic fantasy kind of love she'd read about in books, but the real thing, built on trust and work and mutual respect. The kind of love that showed up every day and did the hard things. "I want to keep building this life with you, as partners, equals." She squeezed his hand. "I want to make this official. Get married, if you're willing." "I'm willing. Been willing." He smiled. "But I'm not doing some big fancy wedding. Justice of the peace in town. Simple vows, done." "That's all I want anyway. The fancy stuff never mattered to me." "Good. Then we'll ride down next week and make it legal." They got married on a Tuesday afternoon in Red Creek with Catherine and the marshal as witnesses. Alara wore the same practical clothes she always wore, and Cade hadn't shaved. The vows were simple, just a promise to stand by each other through whatever came next. When it was done and the papers were signed, Alara looked at the marriage certificate with her name on it, Alara Ashen now, joined to his legally and officially, and felt something settle into place. She wasn't property anymore. She was a wife, a teacher, a landowner, a person who mattered. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Ashen?" Cade asked. "Yeah, let's go home." They rode back up the mountain together, side by side, and Alara looked at the land that was theirs now. The cabin they'd built and rebuilt, the garden that fed them, the second cabin where women found safety, the future they were building together, one choice at a time. She'd started as nothing, a girl sold for gambling debts, told she was worthless, beaten down by the people who should have protected her. But she'd become something more. Someone who survived the mountain and became stronger than it. Someone who helped others find their own strength. Someone who'd taken the worst moment of her life and turned it into the beginning of something better. The woman once called worthless had become a builder, a teacher, a giver of second chances. And the man who'd offered her a choice that night in the saloon had become her partner in every sense of the word. Together, they'd made a home in the wilderness, a sanctuary for the broken, a place where anyone could learn that they were worth more than what the world said they were. And as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors too beautiful to name, Alara Ashen smiled and knew she was exactly where she was meant to be.